The intervention was supposed to save Brian's marriage after his wife discovered his drinking had spiraled out of control. Instead, Dr. Phil uncovered why Brian started drinking in the first place. The truth about his brother's death 22 years ago. And when the letter from his dead father was read aloud, it revealed Jacob didn't drown by accident. Brian pushed him, and their father watched the whole thing happen from the dock, then spent 35 years making sure no one ever found out what his youngest son had done. Brian's wife, Rachel, was already crying before Dr. Phil even started talking. "He's been sober for 6 days," she said, her voice shaking. 6 days in 4 years. That's it. Brian sat 3 feet away from her, his jaw clenched, staring at the floor. He hadn't looked at her once since they walked on stage. Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Brian, your wife says you started drinking heavily about 4 years ago. What happened 4 years ago?" "Nothing happened." "Nothing." I said nothing happened. His leg bounced against the stage floor, the rhythm frantic. Rachel's voice cracked. "Your father died, Brian. 4 years ago. Your father died, and you've been drowning yourself ever since." Brian's hands gripped the armrest so hard his knuckles went white. "Du feels skiftet." "Brian, I've seen a lot of grief in this chair. But the way you're reacting right now, that's not just grief. That's guilt." The studio went dead silent. "What are you guilty of?" Brian's breathing went shallow. For 10 seconds, he didn't move. Then, "Ask my father," he said quietly. "Oh, wait. You can't. Because he's dead." Rachel flinched. Dr. Phil didn't blink. "Your father left you something, didn't he? A safety deposit box. Your wife told my producers you refused to open it." Brian's face drained of color. "What do you know about that?" "Because Rachel brought it with her." Dr. Phil gestured offstage. "It's backstage right now. And before we go any further, I think we need to know what's inside." Brian stood up so fast the chair scraped backward. "No, absolutely not. This conversation is over." He made it 3 steps toward the exit before Dr. Phil's voice stopped him. "Your brother Jacob drowned when he was 12 years old. You were 9, and you've never talked about it publicly. Not once. Not in 22 years. Brian froze. "Why is that, Brian?" Brian turned around slowly. His face was a mask of stone, but his hands were shaking. "Because there's nothing to say," he whispered. "My brother's dead. That's it." "No," Dr. Phil said, his voice low. "That's not it. Because if it was just a tragic accident, you wouldn't be standing here ready to walk off my stage rather than open a box your father left you." Brian's jaw worked. His eyes were wet. "Sit down," Dr. Phil said, not unkindly. "Let's find out what your father wanted you to know." After an eternity, Brian sat. The metal box was small, about the size of a shoebox, and covered in a thin layer of dust. Rachel carried it on stage like it was full of explosives. "This was in your father's will," she said, her voice tight. "Instructions said you had to open it alone, but you wouldn't. You threw it in the closet and pretended it didn't exist." Brian stared at the box like it might attack him. Dr. Phil took it from Rachel and set it on the coffee table between them. "Do you have a key?" Rachel pulled a small brass key from her pocket and placed it next to the box. "Brian," Dr. Phil said carefully, "I need you to tell me why you're terrified of what's inside." "I'm not." "Don't lie to me. You're 47 years old, and you're looking at that box like you're 9 again." Brian's breath hitched. "What happened the day Jacob died?" The silence stretched so long the audience started to shift uncomfortably. Then Brian spoke, his voice barely audible. "We were at the lake house. Dad was working on the boat dock. Jacob and I were swimming. He swallowed hard. We got into a fight. Over something stupid, a toy, I don't even remember. He pushed me under the water. Held me down. I couldn't breathe." Rachel's hand covered her mouth. "When I came up, I was so angry. So scared. His voice broke. I pushed him back. Hard. And he fell backward off the dock and hit his head on the ladder." Dr. Phil's expression didn't change. And then he sank. "And I didn't." Brian's hands were shaking violently now. By the time Dad jumped in and pulled him out, it was too late. The audience gasped. "The police ruled it an accidental drowning," Brian continued, his voice hollow. "Everyone said it was a tragic accident. No one ever asked what happened before he went under." "But your father knew," Dr. Phil said quietly. Brian nodded, tears streaming down his face. He saw me push Jacob. He was 10 feet away, and he never told anyone. Rachel was crying openly now. Brian, why didn't you ever tell me? Because I killed my brother. The words exploded out of him. I was 9 years old and I killed him, and my father spent the rest of his life covering it up so I wouldn't have to live with people knowing what I did. Dr. Phil let the silence hang for a moment. Then he picked up the key. Let's see what he wanted to say to you. Inside the box were 3 things. A waterlogged toy boat, faded blue, the paint peeling. A newspaper clipping from July 2002. Local boy, 12, drowns in tragic accident. And a sealed envelope with Brian's name written in shaky handwriting. Brian stared at the envelope like it was a snake. Dr. Phil picked it up. Do you want me to read it? Or do you want to? I can't. Okay. Dr. Phil opened the envelope carefully and pulled out 2 handwritten pages. He scanned the first few lines, and his face changed. Oh, Brian. What? Brian's voice was panicked. What does it say? Dr. Phil looked up. Your father wrote this 3 days before he died. He knew he was dying, and he wanted you to know the truth. I already know the truth. I killed Jacob. No, Dr. Phil said softly. You didn't. The world stopped. What? Dr. Phil started reading aloud, his voice steady. Brian, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I need you to know something I should have told you 35 years ago. Jacob's death wasn't your fault. You pushed him, yes. But Jacob didn't drown because he hit his head. He drowned because his heart stopped. Brian's face went white. What? Dr. Phil continued. 2 weeks before the accident, we took Jacob to the cardiologist. He had an undiagnosed heart condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The doctor said any sudden shock could trigger cardiac arrest. We were scheduled to get a second opinion the following month. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. When he hit the water, his heart stopped immediately. I saw it happen. I jumped in within seconds, but he was already gone. The push didn't kill him, Brian. His heart did. But when the police came, when everyone asked what happened, I knew if I told the truth, that you two were fighting, that you pushed him, they'd blame you. You'd spend your whole life thinking you were a murderer. Brian couldn't breathe. So elite. I said he was swimming alone, that he must have hit his head on the ladder by accident. And I let you believe it was your fault because I thought, somehow, that was better than you having to explain to police why you pushed your brother. Dr. Phil's voice wavered slightly. I was wrong. I see that now. I turned you into a child who thought he killed his brother, and then I watched you carry that weight for 35 years. I'm so sorry, son. Jacob's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't murder. It was a heart condition no one knew about, and bad timing, and 2 boys who were just being brothers. The paper shook in Dr. Phil's hands as he read the last line. You didn't kill Jacob, but I killed the boy you could have been. I hope you can forgive me. Dr. Phil set the letter down. Brian sat frozen, his mouth open, tears pouring down his face. No sound came out. Rachel crossed the stage and wrapped her arms around him, and he collapsed into her, sobbing so hard his whole body shook. The audience was silent except for the sound of crying. Before we continue, I need to know, if you were Brian's father, would you have told the truth that day, or would you have protected your son the same way? Drop your answer below. It took 5 minutes for Brian to compose himself enough to speak. When he finally did, his voice was wrecked. He let me think I killed Jacob for 35 years. Dr. Phil nodded slowly. He did. Why? Why wouldn't he just tell me? Because he was terrified, Dr. Phil said. He was terrified that if people knew you pushed Jacob, even accidentally, they'd look at you differently. That you'd be the kid who killed his brother, whether it was your fault or not. Brian shook his head. But I've been living with that anyway. I've been that kid in my own head for my entire life. I know. Do you? Brian's voice rose. Do you know what it's like to grow up believing you're a murderer? To be too afraid to have kids because you might lose your temper and hurt them the way you hurt your brother? Rachel's breath caught. Brian, we don't have kids, Rachel. Not because of finances or timing or any of the reasons I gave you. We don't have kids because I'm terrified I'll do to them what I did to Jacob. She was crying again. You wouldn't. You could never. I pushed my brother into a lake and he died. His voice cracked on the last word. How do you know I wouldn't? How does anyone know? Dr. Phil stood up and moved closer. Brian, listen to me. You were 9 years old. Your brother held you underwater. You panicked and you pushed him away. That's not murder. That's self-defense. That's a child trying to breathe. But if I hadn't pushed him, he still would have died, Dr. Phil said firmly. Maybe not that day. Maybe not that way. But eventually, that heart condition would have killed him. Whether it was in the lake, on a soccer field, in his sleep, it was going to happen. The cardiologist told your parents that. Your father knew it. Brian's face crumpled. Then why didn't he tell me? Because he was a father trying to protect his son from a world that doesn't always understand nuance. He made a choice. It was the wrong choice, but he made it out of love. Brian picked up the toy boat from a box. His hands were shaking. This was Jacob's, he whispered. He got it for his 10th birthday. We used to race them in the bathtub. Rachel took his hand. Why did your father put it in the box? Brian turned the boat over. On the bottom, carved in messy child handwriting, were 2 sets of initials. JM plus BM. Jacob made this, Brian said softly. 2 weeks before he died. He carved both our names on it. His voice broke, because even though we fought all the time, we were still brothers. Dr. Phil's eyes were wet. Brian, your brother didn't die hating you. He died being your brother. And wherever he is, I promise you, he doesn't blame you for what happened. Brian sobbed into his hands. The boat clutched against his chest. There's something else, Brian said quietly, after another long silence. Dr. Phil sat back down. What? The drinking. It didn't start when Dad died. He looked at Rachel, his face full of guilt. It started 4 years ago, but not because he died. It started because of what he told me when he was dying. Rachel's face went pale. What did he tell you? Brian's jaw clenched. He was in hospice. 3 days before he died. I was alone with him, and he was barely conscious, but he grabbed my hand and said, his voice broke. He said, I'm sorry I let you think you killed him. I should have told you the truth. Dr. Phil leaned forward. He told you Jacob's death wasn't your fault? Not in detail. Just enough. Enough that I knew there was more to the story. Enough that I realized he'd been lying to me my whole life. And that's when you started drinking, Dr. Phil said. Yeah. Brian's voice was bitter. Because suddenly, everything I'd built my life on, the guilt, the shame, the reason I kept everyone at arm's length, it was all based on a lie my father told me when I was 9. And instead of feeling relieved, I fell. He trailed off. Angry, Dr. Phil finished. Furious, Brian corrected. Because he took 35 years from me. 35 years of thinking I was a monster. And he knew the whole time, and he said nothing. Rachel was crying. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know how. Brian shouted. How do you tell your wife that your entire personality, the reason you're distant, the reason you panic when things get out of control, the reason you won't have kids, is based on a lie your dead father told you? He stood up and started pacing. I didn't open the box because I was terrified of what else he lied about. I thought, his voice broke. I thought maybe Jacob didn't even have a heart condition. Maybe that was just another story Dad made up to make me feel better after he died. So you drank instead, Dr. Phil said quietly. Yeah, I drank instead, because it was easier than facing the truth. Dr. Phil picked up the letter again. Brian, there's one more thing your father wrote. At the very end, Brian stopped pacing. What? Dr. Phil's voice was gentle. I know you'll be angry when you read this. You have every right to be. But I need you to understand, I didn't stay silent because I didn't love you. I stayed silent because I loved you too much. I couldn't stand the thought of you being punished for something that wasn't your fault. I know that doesn't make it right. But I hope someday you'll understand why I made the choice I did. Dr. Phil looked up. Your father didn't lie to hurt you, Brian. He lied to save you. He just didn't realize he was destroying you in the process. The cameras were off. Brian sat in Dr. Phil's office. Same chair, different room. Rachel sat next to him, her hand in his. How are you doing? Dr. Phil asked. Brian exhaled slowly. Better. I've been sober for 48 days. Going to meetings. Actually talking about what happened instead of drowning it. And how's that going? It's hard, Brian admitted. There are days I want to be angry at my father. Days I want to forgive him. Days I can't figure out which one is right. Dr. Phil nodded. They're both right. Grief and anger can live in the same space. Rachel spoke up. We went to the lake house last week. First time in 4 years. Brian smiled slightly. We took Jacob's boat, put it in the water, and let it float out to the middle of the lake. It felt like, I don't know, like letting him go, maybe, and the guilt. Dr. Phil asked carefully, is it still there? Brian was quiet for a long time. Yeah, he finally said, but it's different now. Before, it was this massive, crushing thing that defined every choice I made. Now it's just sad. Jacob died, and it wasn't my fault, but I still miss him. I still wish I could go back and change that day. Not because I think I murdered him, but because he was my brother, and he should have gotten to grow up. His voice cracked. He'd be 44 now. He'd probably have kids. Maybe we'd still race toy boats with them. Dr. Phil smiled slightly. Maybe you still can. Brian looked up. What? Rachel reached in her bag and pulled out a small wrap box. She handed it to Brian, her eyes wet. I'm 3 months pregnant, she whispered. Brian's hands froze on the box. He stared at her, his face cycling through shock, fear, and then, slowly, something that looked like hope. Are you sure? I'm sure. She smiled through her tears. And I think if it's a boy, we should name him Jacob. Brian's face crumpled, and he pulled her into his arms, sobbing. Dr. Phil looked away, giving them a moment. When Brian finally pulled back, he opened the box. Inside was a tiny toy boat, brand new, painted blue. For the next generation, Rachel said softly. So Jacob's memory doesn't drown with the guilt. Brian held the boat in his shaking hands and nodded. Yeah, he whispered. For the next generation. Here's the question I've been wrestling with since Brian walked off that stage. His father lied to protect him, but that lie destroyed 43 years of Brian's life. So was the father a hero who made an impossible choice? Or was he selfish for prioritizing his own peace over his son's truth? There's no easy answer. Some of you will say he should have told the truth that day. Some of you will say you'd have done the exact same thing. I want to know where you stand. Drop your answer below, hero or selfish, and tell me why. And if this story wrecked you the way it wrecked me, wait until you see what happens when a woman confronts her mother on stage, only to discover her dead father has been alive for 27 years, remarried, and living 3 towns away. That story drops next week, and it's the kind of revelation that makes you question everything you think you know about family. Hit subscribe. You won't want to miss it.